The alien warrior had crushed 12 worlds without breaking a sweat. He stood a full foot taller than any human, armored in plates that had shrugged off tank rounds. He wanted to prove a point in front of the cameras. So he slapped the human negotiator across the face, hard, in front of every delegate on the station. 5 seconds later, he was on his knees, and nobody in that room had even seen the human move. The station orbiting the neutral world of Calvex had never hosted a meeting this important. 9 empires, 1 shaky ceasefire, and humanity sitting at the table for the very first time as anything other than a footnote. Warlord Draxus Korn of the Ithari Dominion hated that table. He'd spent 40 years conquering star systems the old way a Euros, through fear, through force, through making examples out of anyone who challenged him. And now he was supposed to sit across from a species barely 300 years into spaceflight and treat them like equals. Humanity's negotiator was a woman named Captain Sarah Kessler, former Marine, now representing Earth's interests in front of warlords who'd been carving up galaxies since before humans had electricity. She wasn't intimidated. That bothered Draxus more than anything. "Your species amuses me," Draxus said. His voice a deep rumble through the translator, loud enough for every camera drone in the chamber to catch. "You sit here like you belong. Like your little planet matters." "We're here because we earned it," Sarah replied evenly. "Same as everybody else at this table." The chamber went quiet. 9 empires watching, waiting to see how the newest species at the table would handle pressure from someone who'd never lost a fight in 4 decades. Draxus stood, towering over the table, plates of battle-worn armor catching the light. "Earned it. Let me show the room what your kind actually earns." He moved fast for something his size, closing the distance in 2 strides, and struck Sarah across the face, hard enough to snap her head sideways. The sound of it cracking through the silent chamber like a gunshot. Every delegate froze. Some out of shock. Some already calculating how this would spiral into war. Sarah didn't fall. She didn't even stumble back more than half a step. She turned her head back slowly, blood at the corner of her mouth, and looked Draxus dead in the eye with an expression that made even the hardened Krill ambassador in the front row lean back in his seat. "Big mistake," she said quietly. Draxus laughed, loud and mocking, turning to face the cameras to punctuate his little display of dominance. He never saw what came next. Second one, Sarah's weight shifted onto her back foot. Years of Marine close quarters training kicking in on pure instinct before her conscious mind had even caught up to the pain in her jaw. Second two, Draxus was still mid-law, half turned toward the camera drones, completely unprepared for the idea that anything at that table could touch him a Euros. Because in 40 years, nothing ever had. Second three. Sarah drove forward, using the low angle Draxus's own turned posture gave her, drove her elbow into the one weak seam. Every soldier in the room knew Ithri battle armor had at the collar joint intel humanity had traded hard for during 3 years of quiet diplomatic groundwork. Nobody else at that table had bothered doing. Draxus's head snapped back, more from shock than pain, his laugh dying in his throat. Second four. Sarah swept his stabilizing leg with a move so simple, so almost lazy, that half the delegates in the room would later argue about what exactly they'd seen. 4 decades of raw physical dominance meant nothing against someone who understood exactly where his armor's weight distribution failed him. Draxus, a warlord who had personally overseen the fall of 12 worlds, hit the floor of that chamber on one knee, armor scraping against polished metal, stunned into a silence he hadn't experienced in longer than most species at that table had existed. Second five. Sarah stood over him, blood still on her lip, breathing steady, and said the 4 words that would end up quoted in military academies across a dozen systems within the year. "We don't hit back twice," because she didn't need to. Once was enough. The chamber stayed dead silent. No cheering. No gasps. Just 91 of Rose's weight. 9 delegates from 9 empires, staring at a species they'd all filed away as harmless newcomers, suddenly recalculating everything they thought they knew. Draxus stayed on one knee for 3 full seconds longer than necessary. Not because he couldn't stand, but because some primal part of him, honed over 40 years of reading dominance in every room he walked into, understood exactly what had just happened. He hadn't lost a fight. He'd lost the fight before it even started. The moment he underestimated the one species at that table who'd spent 300 years fighting each other hard enough to know exactly how to end a fight in 5 seconds flat. News of the Slappa Euros and what came right after Euros spread through Concord space faster than any official broadcast could contain it. Camera drone footage leaked within hours, and by the next cycle, every major network across 9 empires had looped the same 5 seconds on repeat. A human woman standing back up after being struck by one of the deadliest warlords alive, and putting him on his knee in front of the entire summit. Sarah Kessler became a name whispered in war rooms across the galaxy, not because Earth wanted a fight, but because every empire suddenly understood something they'd missed for 300 years of quiet human diplomacy. Humans weren't harmless. They'd just been patient. Back on Earth, General Marcus Webb watched the footage in Pentagon Command with a grim kind of pride. "She used the Vren Accord intel," he said. "The armor weak point. That took 3 years of quiet trading to nail down." "She didn't hesitate," said an aide beside him, still watching the clip loop for the 10th time. "She wasn't supposed to," Webb replied. "That's the whole point of training somebody like Kessler. You don't send a negotiator who flinches." Meanwhile, Draxus Korn sat in a private chamber aboard his flagship, armor removed, staring at a wall, replaying those 5 seconds over and over in his head. 40 years of conquest. And one human woman had ended his reputation in less time than it took most soldiers to draw a weapon. His advisors urged retaliation. Full military response. Wipe the insult clean with force, the way the Ithari Dominion always had. Draxus said nothing for a long time. "No," he finally said. "We do not attack them. Warlord, they humiliated you in front of 9 empires euros. They didn't humiliate me." Draxus cut in, voice quieter than his advisors had ever heard it. "I humiliated myself. I struck a species I never bothered to study, and it took her 5 seconds to teach me why that was the worst mistake of my career." He stood, moving to the viewport overlooking the stars. "Send word to the Concord," he said. "The Ithari Dominion recognizes Earth's seat, permanently, no conditions." His advisors stared, stunned into the same silence that had gripped that summit chamber days earlier. For the first time in 40 years, Draxus Korn wasn't chasing conquest. He was making sure his empire never made the same mistake twice. 6 months after the summit, Captain Sarah Kessler stood in that same chamber on Calvex Station, this time surrounded by delegates who no longer looked at humanity like an afterthought, squeezed into a seat they didn't deserve. The scar near her jaw had healed. The footage of those 5 seconds hadn't gone anywhere a euros. It had become required viewing in military academies from Earth to systems. Most humans still couldn't pronounce. A case study in composure, precision, and exactly how fast overconfidence could turn into a very bad day. Draxus Korn entered the chamber last, as tradition required for the Dominion's representative. He'd requested this meeting himself, something unheard of from a warlord who used to see diplomacy as weakness. He stopped in front of Sarah, the whole chamber watching, waiting to see if history was about to repeat itself. Instead, Draxus extended a hand euro, not for a strike, not for dominance, but in the exact gesture humans had taught the conquered meant respect between equals. "I underestimated your kind," he said, voice carrying through the silent chamber. "That mistake nearly cost my empire everything. It will not happen again." Sarah shook his hand, firm, steady, no hesitation. "Good," she said, "because next time, we might not stop at 5 seconds." A ripple of tension broke into something else entirely across the chamber of euros. Not fear this time, but understanding. Respect earned the hard way, the only way that ever really sticks. Later that night, aboard the Earth transport heading home, Sarah sat by the viewport, watching the stars blur past, her reflection catching the small scar near her jaw in the glass. A young ensign sat across from her, still wide-eyed from witnessing history firsthand. "Ma'am, can I ask? Were you scared, standing up to him like that?" Sarah considered the question for a moment, then shook her head slowly. "Scared's for people who don't know what they're capable of," she said. "I always knew what 5 seconds could do." He just found out the hard way. Back on Earth, that clip still played everywhere euro, a reminder to every empire watching that humanity hadn't clawed its way onto the galactic stage by being harmless. They'd done it by making sure nobody who underestimated them ever got the chance to make that mistake twice.